Passage from Matthew's Gospel. We're going to have a look at that together now. You might think back to Tuesday, the 22nd of February 2011. There was a major earthquake on that day that occurred in the city of Christchurch in New Zealand. Maybe you remember that. It was significant. 185 people died. Buildings collapsed. Others were so severely damaged they had to be torn down. Sarah and I, we visited Christchurch in 2014 as our honeymoon after getting married. And the destruction was still very evident 3 years on, things still being rebuilt. As part of the trip, though, we visited this site, a graveyard in a small town called Akaroa, which is about 55 kilometres as the crow flies from Christchurch. And this is what the earthquake had done to the tombs, to the graves. Tombs had broken open, gravestones fallen down and crushed. And I can report on that day, there were no bodies, living or dead, that were seen, apart from Sarah and myself, nothing else, thankfully. But you might notice in our reading today, that's not the case in this first account of Jesus' resurrection. In today's reading, there's another earthquake, and this time a body is seen. But it's not a dead one, it's not a corpse, rather a living body. Now, I have visited a lot of cemeteries in my time. That was just one of them, but we used to live in Paran, and the only green space that there was the cemetery, and so we'd walk that each day. So I spent a lot of time in cemeteries, and I've never seen a dead person come walking out of a grave. Have you? I assume you haven't, right? If you have, we might need to have a chat about something else. But I've never seen it. So what do we make then of this account in front of us that tells us someone who was really dead walked out of the grave? Is it made up? Is it metaphorical? Is it real? Well, I think the best way to have a look at this is to have a look at what the eyewitnesses to the event thought themselves and see what they make of it first and foremost. So that's what we're going to do. One of the things that we first notice as we work through this, and by the way, you can follow along, and I encourage you to, these blue Bibles, if you pick one up, it's page 811. It's Matthew 28 that we're looking at for most of today. Page 811, Matthew 28 in the blue pew Bibles. So as we look back there and think back about Good Friday, one of the things that Matthew, who wrote this gospel, tells us is that Jesus really was dead. Now, some people claim that Jesus didn't actually die on the cross. Some claim he didn't even go on the cross, but some claim he didn't die. He just kind of passed out temporarily. They took him off and put him in a tomb, and he revived in the tomb. So he didn't actually die. But Matthew's account, it's very clear that Matthew believes Jesus really died. On Friday, we considered what happened at his death, what Matthew wrote. We know that he was killed publicly from this account. He was watched on by those who were regular executioners, experts in the field of death. They knew a dead body when they saw one. Alongside that fact, there is in 27 verse 56 recorded 3 women witnessing Jesus' death. And we find 2 of those same women are there watching Jesus' body go into the tomb in chapter 27, verse 61. And then in today's passage that we read, the same 2 women are there in verse 1, going to the tomb to mourn. So these women, they watched him die, they saw him buried, and like many people I've met in graveyards, they were there to pay their respects because they knew that's where the body would be, right? Dead people don't move. Jesus was really dead, Matthew wants us to know. But also, he wants us to know that Jesus' tomb was really secure. So in 27 verse 62, we find out about some measures put in place to ensure the tomb is secure. And, I've been to secure places. I used to work as an engineer, and one of the secure places I visited were power stations down in the Gippsland Valley. There were logbooks. If you entered in, you had to log that you entered in and out. There were guards, there were barriers, barbed wire fences, cameras. if someone went in, you knew about it. And you knew too if they hadn't come out. Matthew is at pains to tell us that the tomb was really secure. The body was secured. In verse 62, even though Jesus has died, the authorities are still worried about him. Not because they think he's going to come back to life, because, well, do bodies come back to life? That's not going to happen. No, they're not worried about that. They're worried about deception. See what they say in verse 63, if you've got a Bible there. Chapter 27, verse 63, they go to Pilate, who's the governor at the time, and they say, "Sir, we remember that while he was still alive, that deceiver said, 'After 3 days I will rise again.' So give the order for the tomb to be made secure until the 3rd day. Otherwise, his disciples may come and steal the body and tell the people that he has been raised from the dead. This last deception will be worse than the first." Jesus is dead, they presume, so therefore he's clearly a deceiver. He said he wouldn't, he promised a lot of things, but he's dead. So he's deceived us about those. But they're still worried about a future deception his disciples might bring about, that they might play a trick on everyone and steal the body from the tomb and claim Jesus has risen. And so they ask Pilate for things, and Pilate gives what they need to make the tomb as secure as possible. There's a significant enough Roman guard posted at the door, armed people, an armed guard there, watching out for any kind of trickery. And then we have this detail, the stone is sealed. Just like your milk containers or your juice bottles, whatever, they've got an airtight seal on them, don't they? And if that's been tampered with, if you open your milk and the seal's tampered with, take it back to the store, right? Something's not right about that. Likewise, the stone was sealed, so you knew if someone had been in or out. The Jews had done everything possible, Matthew's telling us, to make sure the tomb was secure. The body couldn't be stolen. So then, to our surprise, we find out chapter 28, it looks like Jesus really was alive again. 28 verses 1 to 10. We come to our earthquake that I was sort of talking about at the start. It's actually the second earthquake in the death and resurrection of Jesus stories. We talked about an earthquake on Friday. When Jesus died, there was an earthquake. And now there's another earthquake when he rises again, verse 2. But notice the tomb was so secure, the earthquake is not the thing that gets Jesus out of the tomb. He's already out, in fact. And the tomb is still sealed, and an angel must be sent to open the door, only to reveal to those watching on, it's empty. Now, I'm not sure if you've ever watched that classic Sound of Music movie. I kind of picture it a bit like the scene at the end of the movie where the Von Trapp family singers, they've won the competition in Salzburg, and they're to receive their award, and the announcer, he says out, and I present the Von Trapp family singers, and everyone claps, and the spotlight looks at the wall, and we wait with suspense, and no one comes. And he says again, the Von Trapp family singers, and everyone claps again, and the spotlight's on the wall. We wait for a while, nothing happens, and then a man comes running in, and he says, they've gone! Well, as the stone is rolled away, we see Jesus' body is gone. There's nothing in there. The body was placed in, seen, but now it's gone. And the women who saw it go in are there to witness this. They're confronted with the reality that there's no dead body. In fact, the only dead bodies that we read about in this passage is that of the guards. Did you notice that as we read it? What the guards looked like? They were so terrified. So verse 4, that the guards were so afraid of the angel that they shook and became like dead men. The only dead people in the passage are the guards. Well, the angel, he goes and tells the women now, inspect the tomb, have a look for yourselves, verse 6, and see there's nothing in it. There's no dead body to be found anywhere, apart from those guards, of course. Jesus really is alive, the angel tells them. And the angel now tells us this should affect the way that we think about everything Jesus has said. Verse 5, the angel says this to the women. Don't be afraid, for I know that you're looking for Jesus who was crucified. He's not here. He has risen, just as he said. Just as he said. The chief priests and the Pharisees, they'd remembered Jesus saying this, and they tried to disprove it. Well, the angel confirms now it's happened. It has happened. And that should affect the way that we hear everything Jesus has said up to this point and everything he'll say after it. It tells us he's trustworthy. His word comes true. He keeps it. Now, I don't know who's the most trustworthy person in your life. Who's the person who they say something and it happens? I have to commend, Elaine. She works in the office, and I've come to learn, when you ask Elaine to do something or when she says she'll do something, she does it. It happens. Almost magically sometimes. Elaine does it. I can trust her word and what she says. I take it seriously. So too, Jesus' words come true. He has come back to life as he said, it seems. And that means there's implications for everything that Jesus has said before and what he's about to say to his disciples now. We're to take him seriously. What he says is reliable and trustworthy. We can believe it. Well, he's really alive, and now he gives instructions to the women to go ahead to a place called Galilee where they'll see Jesus with their own eyes. But they don't get far, you might have noticed in the reading. As they go to tell the disciples, on the road, they meet the risen Jesus. He's no spirit, by the way. Verse 9 tells us they clasp his feet. They can touch him. There's a living body there. But that's not the most shocking thing. The most shocking thing is what else they do. In verse 9, we read they worship him. And I'll tell you what, the first readers of this would have been Jewish, and this would have, I think, struck them to their core, shook them to their core. Because Jews knew that you only worshiped the Lord God. They knew the Old Testament law that said this: worship the Lord your God and serve him only. And just before we think, well, maybe Jesus doesn't know, we need to remember back to the very beginning of this account of Jesus' life. Back to chapter 4, there was a figure, Satan, a spirit figure that tried to trick Jesus, offering him everything in return for worship. And what did Jesus say to him? Exactly these words from Deuteronomy. He says, no, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Jesus knew that worship was only for God. He knew the law, and yet he doesn't reprimand these women for what they do. Why? Because he really is the Son of God. He really is God in the flesh, and worthy, therefore, of all praise. And the women here and those who meet the risen Jesus respond in this way later in our passage as well. They show us the right response to seeing and meeting the risen Lord is worship, to give him your all in worship. Well, the scene doesn't last long. The women are told to tell the disciples, and they go on to do that. They're very faithful in this account. The men are nowhere to be seen, but the women, they're at the death, they're at the tomb, they're at his resurrection, and faithfully going to tell the disciples that were absent. Well, they go to do that. But then we get to see what the religious leaders do. The religious leaders here are the real deceivers. The guards, so terrified, they became like dead men, now come back alive somewhat in the narrative, and they run off to the leaders of the religion, the religious leaders, and they tell them what's happened. Now, I wonder if you, as you read that, thought that was astonishing, what their reaction is. Because they don't seem to pause for a moment to consider the news they receive could mean Jesus really is who he said he was. Instead, they come up with a story to cover things up. And strangely, they go with the theft of a body as the answer, which is the one explanation they know cannot be true because they're the ones who've posted the guard, who've had the stone sealed. They're the ones who know they've made the tomb, secure and unable for something to be stolen out of it. Whatever happened on Easter Sunday, it wasn't body snatching. And these religious leaders knew that. There's a deep irony here, because the ones who were really worried about deceit and Jesus and his disciples deceiving other people end up becoming the deceptive ones. They spread a story they know to be untrue while suppressing the truth that the guards have testified to. Well, they're the really deceptive ones in our story. Jesus is God, and we find out as the story ends here, he's really the king. Now, so much of Matthew's gospel, it takes place on mountains. There's a lot of mountaintop experiences, and it's fitting the final words take place there too. In verses 16 to 20, the 11 remaining disciples, remember Judas has killed himself, he's dead, so there's just 11 left. They come and meet Jesus, and just like the women, they worship Jesus. When they see the risen Jesus, they worship him. But they also see and tell us here that Jesus really is king. Our kingship has been a big question in Matthew. There's a big question at the crucifixion. You might remember the guards, they mocked him, they flogged him, they dressed him up as a fake king. There was a sign nailed across the top of the cross that said, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." The taunts from the religious leaders who passed by Jesus on the cross, they said things like this: "He's the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross," in mocking. They didn't believe he was the king, but now he reveals himself. He is the risen King of all. On the mountain, Jesus declares these words to his disciples. In verse 18, he says, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me." Jesus tells us he's not merely the king of a little tiny place or one person or of Israel. He's the king of all. God has given him all authority, whether it's over heavenly powers like angels or spiritual forces, he's the king of them, or whether it's over earthly powers, every person, every ruler, everything in this world, he is the king of it. And his rule has started. He has been given the authority. He rules right now. And what does he do with his power? Well, he gives a commission for disciples to make more disciples, not just Jewish followers too, but verse 19, he tells them they're to make disciples of all nations, which is why you're here actually, otherwise this would just be a Jewish religion, but you're all here because Jesus told his disciples to make disciples of all nations. The King's Commission is all-encompassing of all people of the world. Nobody's excluded from the call to follow Jesus, and every disciple is commanded to take their part in the work that the King of Heaven has called them to. So you who are disciples here today, you have a job to do given by the King of the universe. You've got a task. I wonder how you'd respond if today the Prime Minister turned up at your door and he said to you, "I've got a task for you. There's a fuel crisis on. Guess what? I've got a hidden reserve of oil and I'm looking for people to help distribute it. I need your help. People need your help to get fuel to their doors." Would you answer the call? Maybe it depends on what you think of the Prime Minister or what you believe about what he's just said. But maybe that's true of Jesus too, and how we think about him. Whether we take seriously his commission, his words, depends on how seriously we take the King. Whether we believe what he says is what we're called to do. Whether we believe he really has all authority. Because he gives his disciples a job to do and where to do it. Well, Matthew wants you to see Jesus rose again from the dead. He wrote this, he consulted eyewitnesses so that we might believe it. Of course, there's more evidence than just what this gospel writer says about Jesus, and more than I can say in this time slot. So if you've got questions, please shoot me an email. Scan that QR code, submit a question. I'll get back to you about that and try and give you a good answer. There's plenty more evidence about the resurrection. Or maybe you've got other questions as well. Why not sign up to that Christianity Explored course that we told you about? Starting Tuesday nights in Term 2, a great opportunity to ask any question you might have. Or perhaps you've got questions about life after death. Well, again, come back next week as we explore that topic and have a think about what Christians believe about life after death and what it means for us today. Jesus rose again from the dead, and that calls for a response. It calls us to take his words seriously, both what he said previously and what he has said here at the end. And like the disciples, like the women, to give him the worship he's due, for he is God. And finally, it calls on us who follow him to answer his commission, to make disciples of all nations, for Jesus is King of all. Let's pray. King Jesus, you live and reign today. Would you help us to take seriously the words you've spoken and to obey them? Help us to give our whole lives in worship of you. Help us respond to the commission, the job that you've given us to do. All the while remembering you're with us, always, to the very end of the age. Amen.